Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's show where we're going to be talking about how energy executives can reduce the risk of making the wrong hire. And to do that, we have a true legend in the industry, like a true specialist, somebody who knows what they're talking about. And that is, of course, Mr. Lee D'Souza. How are you doing today, Lee?
I'm very well, thanks, Kirsty. It's nice to be sat on the opposite side today rather than asking questions, but no curveball questions or difficult ones, please.
No, that's not what we agreed. In fact, as we go through today, I do have a couple of questions that I'm going to ask Lee. But if anybody who's watching has anything that they want clarification on, perhaps if you disagree with something, please pop them in the comments and I will bring them up to Lee. Anything to stump him, really, just makes my day if you could do that for me. So very much looking forward to that. Now, Lee, let's start with sort of how we open this. You previously have told me that the cost of the wrong hire is up to 3 times the cost of the salary. And of course, if you're talking kind of exec levels, that's fairly hefty numbers. Now, that doesn't even include time invested, the lost productivity, staff morale, things like that. So, in your opinion, why do so many companies kind of get this wrong when it's something that's so important and can have such a high cost?
Yeah, you make a good point there on the cost of the wrong hire, Kirsty, because for an exec level role, that will be a large six-figure sum. And if you look at perhaps other investments that companies make, whether that be machinery or software that costs that much money, they spend far more time on due diligence, research, they take their time. That due diligence goes out the window for some reason when managers hire people. So I'd like to give you my top 6 reasons why hiring fails. So number
Okay.
1, over 50% of hiring managers have had no interview training. So if you don't know what good looks like, how do you know what to look for? Number 2, a mismatch of expectations. So hiring managers embellish or lie about the role or the company's health. The new employee is going to find out and then leaves when they discover the truth.
Mm-hmm.
3, an ineffective recruitment process. So they hire on skills and experience and they fire on attitude and cultural fits. Number 4, poor questioning. So they interview on gut feel and they make decisions based on whether they like people or not. They ask leading questions like, are you good at stakeholder management, Kirsty? Yes, of course
Oh,
I am.
excellent.
Tick.
Mhm.
Number 5, hiring out of desperation. They hire anyone rather than hiring the best that they can get. And number 6, not taking references. And if
Mm.
they do take references, they ask for someone's opinion rather than asking for evidence of their competence or character. And I could go on, Kirsty, but we've only got 30 minutes, I believe.
We do. We only have a certain amount of time. And other people have kind of been saying as well. Somebody here has said they're not educated enough and haven't been in enough real life situations, which I think is something that's interesting. And this one, I think is such an interesting point. It's poor onboarding. I think that because a lot of the time, if you have done a poor interview, it sort of should come out in the onboarding. And I think if you combine the two, there's definitely that's where a
That's
lot
a
of
really
problems.
good point, actually, because actually, in my view, onboarding should start the moment that someone accepts an offer. And quite
Mm.
often, as soon as they've got someone's signed signature, they just expect them to turn up on day one. And, you know, I think you're missing a trick there to build the relationship, to set expectations, to build rapport, trust, to let them know what's going on, get
Mhm.
them, started early.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So I think we understand why, and I think a lot of it comes down to a lot of the things that you mentioned sort of definitely fall into that people aren't trained properly, like ineffective questionings and things like that. And I really think that desperation key has been so relevant for recent years, especially when we've been in kind of a candidate slump where people are just like, I need someone and they'll do. It's better to have someone than no one. Okay. So I want to go into the next question, which is about how we assess candidates for a particular job, because that's surely going to be so important about making the right hire.
Absolutely. So the first thing to do is to understand what the purpose of the role is and then work backwards. So
Mm.
what do we want to achieve from a business perspective as a result of this hire. And that might change every year as your business evolves. So you need to refresh your job spec regularly. So start with a purpose, create your job spec and person spec around that. And then in our last show, Tom Mallins from Sana Sales Training talked about the SEARCH acronym. So let me remind everyone what that stands for. SEARCH stands for skills, experience, attitude, results, cognitive ability, which means things like ability to learn, and habits. And that's where it goes Pete Tom, Kirsty.
I'm sure I'd be really interested to hear in the comments, actually, which out of those people think is the most important when hiring somebody. Just let us know in the comments.
So in my experience, people think that skills and experience are the most important, but they fire people for not getting results, a lack of cultural fit, and a bad attitude. So I'm going to talk perhaps more on those three areas today, specifically using competency-based interviewing. Do you know what competency-based interviewing is, Kirsty?
I mean, obviously I do, but for people who perhaps don't, of which I obviously am not one, could you just tell us what that is?
Yeah, so it's interview questions. It's a technique to test someone's skills or ability to do a task or how they behave.
Okay, so it's sort of it's not having an interview just based on kind of what they say on their CV. It delves a bit deeper. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and you want to do a bit of both. So let's say we want to test some results, the R of the SEARCH acronym. We want to test the key achievements and results that someone's achieved in their career. And let's say you're interviewing a sales director because your business has an underperforming sales team. So you could ask candidates, for example, when they helped improve an underperforming sales team and take them to a high performing team. So you can use what's called the STAR methodology to probe their answers. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and results. So situation, can you tell me your best example of improving an underperforming sales team and creating a high performing team? Task, what were you asked to do by the company? Action, what did you personally do to improve that performance? And you've got to be careful sometimes because people say, we did this, and that's where you go, but what about you? What part did you do? Yeah. And then results, what were the outcomes of what you did? So it's a technique that I think requires practice. So you can do role plays with your colleagues. And in that situation, a good answer would be, I was brought in to help a sales team that had missed their sales target for 3 years running. I implemented a sales methodology that everyone followed. I trained everyone on consultative solution selling, and our business development managers all achieved double the sales target. We grew by 50% for 3 years running and exceeded our annual target. That would be a good answer, Kirsty.
It'd be a great answer, I think.
Would. But if someone struggles to give specific examples of how they've coached people to get better, what they've done to improve performance, then they haven't got that competency.
Okay, interesting. Now on this, do you think when people are kind of interviewing people that they look for reasons why someone should be right for the role, but they should actually be looking for reasons why somebody's wrong for the role, looking for reasons to say this person isn't right? Do you think that comes in here?
I think that's a really good point, Kirsty. Yeah, actually, I think you probably should be in the mindset of qualification rather than just trying to woo them. And it is a balance, but I think sometimes hiring managers are desperate and they're just trying to impress them and they're doing all of the talking and doing no qualification, and then hey-ho, they end up with the wrong person.
Yes, that's not what we're after at all. Okay.
No. So I just want to talk about attitude and cultural fit, because the results, cultural fit, and an attitude are where it falls down. So it might be you ask a question related to someone's attitude to working hours, not necessarily whether they've got a good attitude to work or not. And so you've got to tailor these questions to your organization. So I know some execs or certain roles that are international and remit, and you might have to speak to Australia between 4 and 7 a.m. So you want to be interviewing candidates and saying, look, are you used to working long hours across multiple time zones? If so, where? And are you happy to do that? And you want to hear people, yeah, I've done it before, I've done it lots of times, it's not a problem. There'll be others that say, it's really not for me. And those people, you want to rule them out. And you do want to put people off in an interview. Right now, there's this big battle between employers and employees coming back into work. And if the role, you want someone to be in the office 4 times a week, be crystal clear around your expectation. You need to be in 4 days a week, not 2, not 3. There's no flexibility. You don't want to get to the end of the process and it be time wasted.
Yeah,
so too many hiring managers don't put people off, then it's too late and they've already hired them.
Okay, yeah. So that's around attitude. And how would you do the same for cultural fit? Because I imagine that's quite a difficult one to sort of ferret out, as it were.
Yeah, and I think this is the main area that many organisations miss out from an interviewing process. And I think companies don't know how to hire for culture, as you said. So I think it's quite simple. I think it's your North Star. Your North Star are your values, and that's what defines your culture. But I think if you don't live and breathe your values, there's no point in asking value-based interview questions. And I think it's also important to think about what it's like to work in your organization and how you get things done. So review all the people in your business that have succeeded, why they've succeeded, look at why former employees have not worked out. And it might be that your organization is very collaborative, but you interview someone that only works in silos. So there's a risk there that they won't be very collaborative, but give them the opportunity to prove you wrong. So it's about tailoring those questions to the environment. If you're an SME business and you're hiring someone from a big corporate, they're used to having lots of resources, big budgets, big teams. In an SME, you have to roll your sleeves up, you're changing the bins, you're wiping the desks, you're hoovering the floor. Look for those red flags.
That's so interesting. Okay. So the kind of ones to sort of focus on a little bit more when you're looking at the assessment is, yes, their capabilities on their CV is important, but that results, attitude, and cultural fit are where, in your opinion, it sort of drops the weaknesses are. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and it's not just accepting what they say, because rarely the first response is the truth. You need to kind of dig deeper and get them to kind of expand on their answer to get to the truth.
Yes, delving deeper. Okay, now on that, you do actually have some tips for this to offer a robust interviewing process. What kind of things can people do to help themselves?
So the interview process, your interview process, has to cover all 5 elements of that search process. And I would probably ideally do a 3-stage interview process. So the first interview, I think, for me, should be more about getting to know them as a person, what they've done in their career that relates to the role, their drivers, their motivators. Also looking out for any red flags.
Okay.
And I'd probably spend 30 minutes in preparation before the interview looking through their CV for areas to explore further. And I always start by asking candidates for a 5-minute overview of their career. And particularly for senior roles, that gives me a window into how good they are at communicating, because for senior roles, it's very important that you're a concise communicator, that you can articulate your point concisely. And quite often, some people can waffle. Yeah, and actually good executives can do that, but ideally we're looking for good communicators.
Yeah, especially at exec level, they should be able to control their nerves and be concise. If you're interviewing a junior, waffle might be okay, but not so much at the exec level, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think another thing is that people don't tailor their CVs for a specific role. They just don't have time, and there could be some hidden gems in their experience that relate to the role that we just don't even know about. So we want to uncover what they're good at, their key achievements that relate to the role, and probably ask one or two competency questions, perhaps some of the main competency questions that relate to skills and experience. Ask about their drivers, their motivators, why are they interested in the job. And we also want to know what else they've got going on in terms of other interviews. How does that rank to our job? And I think sometimes hiring managers fall in love with someone, and then they don't realise until at the end when they make an offer that actually the candidate's more in love with someone else, and they just didn't know, and they went right through a long interview process, and they had no clue at all this person wasn't going to accept. So I think you could kind of need to do some trial closes to understand whether how interested and whether they're likely to accept or not. So you can use a rating scale, call it a thermometer close, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being you'd start with this on Monday, where would you rank this opportunity with us? And ideally, we want it to be nearer to 10. And again, you want to probe their answer. And I think anything less than 6 is a concern.
Okay. All right. And that's all in the first interview sort of stage that you would say?
Yeah, but I think also things can change in an interview process or with people's personal circumstances. Other interviews might come along, their boss might have offered them the perfect role. So you also need to kind of recheck their situation and their interest.
Okay. And how long would you say this call, do you think it should be in person? Should it be on the phone? What do you think the first stage should be?
I think 30 to 45 minutes. I think if they're not wrong, I'd rule them out early, but do it in a polite way and give them reasons and feedback. And it might be that doesn't mean that they're not a good candidate, good at what they do. It's just that it's not right for them.
Okay.
And if it's going really well, then perhaps you might want to make that a bit longer, and it might be 45 to 60 minutes.
Okay.
And then you're moving on to a second, more formal interview that's more competency based.
Okay.
Making sure that you cover the search acronym, including cultural fit questions. And I think you want to have someone else involved in that interview with you to prevent us from falling in love with someone. Someone that's got a different viewpoint, someone that's from a different function.
So like a sense check almost on that individual.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And the second interview, should that be in person, do you think, or?
Ideally, because I think just to see the whites of their eyes, to pick up on body language, I think people tend to be more open. I think ideally you would be meeting with them at some point before you make an offer. And if it's not, then it might be perhaps a final interview. And then I think you want to do some kind of test scenario role that mimics the role in real life. So if it's an MD role or an exec role, it might be that you would get them to come up with what their strategy would be for the business and how they would implement that. If they're a sustainability consultant, it could be that you get them to run a sustainability workshop. So whatever their role is, try and mimic real life to see what they are going to be. It gives you a window into what they're going to be like in real life.
Would you give them prep for that, or is it something that you'd kind of give on the day? Would you give them time to prepare?
I think it depends on what it is.
Yeah.
It could be, if it's a finance related type thing, it could be some kind of numerical thing that you perhaps wouldn't give them prep for. If it's can you run us through how you'd run a sustainability workshop, then you give them 3 or 4 bullet points and how they go about that.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So is that the third interview, that the kind of competency check?
And then references.
Okay.
So there's quite a lot of mixed views on references, but I would always take references. And I think if you're going to ask a candidate's best friend for their opinion, expect a glowing reference, which is not worth the paper it's written on. If you ask previous line managers for evidence of their competencies and achievements related to the search acronym, it's almost impossible to lie. And that's the key. We're looking for tangible evidence, not someone's opinion.
Okay, and that links to kind of, again, the kind of questions that you'd be asking and things. So opinion might be like, they're a really good guy and I really like them, but the tangible evidence is they're not actually that great at the job that they're doing, kind of vibe of what you'd be looking for here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. So we have had a couple of questions, Lee. This question is one I want to bring up. So someone's asked, can I ask you both a question? What are your views on LinkedIn and also people elaborating who and what they actually do? Is there anything that you think needs to happen, and what could the future hold on a better recruitment process? So obviously, I think this is basically asking around LinkedIn and how it matches CVs and how people embellish what they do to look good on the internet, perhaps. How would you figure that out in an interview process?
I think whether it's their LinkedIn profile or it's the CV, most people are presenting their best version, just like someone's website, and I think that's where you probe for looking for evidence and tangible evidence around what how they've evidencing what they say they've done on paper. And I think if you're probing, asking real searching questions, and then when you ask a reference from a previous line manager, Tamlin said that they did X, Y, Z, how did they go about that? What did they do? Talk me through that in more detail. And if they go, I can't remember that, there's some, embellishing going on there, isn't there?
Yeah, and I suppose that would be another good place to sort of ferret out whether it was a team thing, that there was a we, or whether they ran that project, they were the one who was implemented it all, the team did help, but they were the driving force of it, versus they were in that team, it was a group effort, is a very kind of PC way of saying it. Okay, fantastic. So Lee, I am aware of times, and in a second we're going to come up and look at the red flags, the big things where people wave at you to not hire them. But before then, I think you have what could reasonably be referred to as a spectacular offer.
Well, I'd like to think so, Kirsty. Yeah. And I think the problem is hiring managers and companies just don't have the time to put in place their own robust interview process, despite how much it costs. So we're making an offer to the first 5 energy-related companies or people that drop me an email saying, help me with my recruitment process, and we will help them do that. So normally when we help clients design their interview process, that piece of work would cost us £5,000 in terms of man hours. However, we are offering this to the first 5 companies only that message me at £2,500. So that's a 50% discount. So if anyone wants to discuss that further, just drop me an email.
I mean, when you consider that it can cost up to 6 figures if you hire the wrong person, I mean, £2,500, that's nothing in comparison. But yeah, so
you do the math, Kirsty. You do the math.
I'll do the math. So what we're going to do with that, Lee, is if you want to find out more information, feel free to just DM Lee saying interview process, and Lee will start that conversation. But it's the first 5 people who sign up that get the discount, isn't it?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay. So if you have any more questions on that, feel free. But Lee, I really want to go into these red flags, because I think there are some things that people do in an interview. They may pass everything else, but if one of these flags come up, is this absolutely they're done kind of a vibe for you?
Yeah, or certainly worth exploring. So I think regular job movement. So I don't care if I've set those career coaches out there who are obviously going to be siding with, candidates as they should. But if someone has a track record of regular movement, that is a red flag. And I think, most people have joined a business where it didn't work out and they were a victim of circumstance. Fair enough. But if someone has moved roles 5, 6 times in 10 years, for me, that is a concern. And at the very least, you need to probe their reasons for moving by asking them, what was the reason for moving here? What was the reason for moving here? And it might be that some of those are valid reasons, but if there's a pattern there of someone moving on regularly, you must question whether they're going to stay or whether they kept moving on because they got found out.
Yeah, that's what my thought process was on that one. Okay, what's the second red flag?
Candidates that are too money motivated.
Mm.
So in our experience, the candidates that are purely focused on what the role is paying and benefits are the ones that accept counter offers. And the ones that we place for our clients want the role for the right reasons. And of course, package is important. People don't typically take roles if they're going to be worse off, but they're motivated, excited about the role, the opportunity, what they're going to be doing.
So what kind of signs would show that they're too money motivated? Asking about it too much? Really, like, what would show?
I think if you ask them, and what questions have you got, and they're asking you how much is it going to be paying, what's the bonus, the benefits, the perks,
Right.
all perks, no work. And and they could be a good candidate, but those are the ones that tend to accept counter offers, or they move on again because then someone else makes them an even better offer.
Okay, fantastic. That makes sense. Okay, and red flag number 3?
I think those that pass the blame. Someone is giving examples where nothing's their fault when something goes wrong. I think that's a concern around whether they take ownership of their own mistakes, and everyone makes mistakes. And I think the best candidates are, self-aware, admit their own mistakes. And I think those that don't do that perhaps won't face up to future mistakes that they make.
Is that a question that you think is important to ask in interviews, like kind of name a mistake that happened and how you handled it? Is that something you just flat put out there?
Yeah, I mean, I like, what's your biggest failure? What's your biggest weakness? I remember interviewing one candidate, what's your biggest weakness? And he said with a straight face, I don't have any weaknesses. And it was just a big fat, that is interview over. And there are people like that, and that's giving you a window into what they're like, because I think the best executives have, whether they're executive or not, have a growth mindset.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, fantastic. Okay, and the next red flag, the final one?
Those that trash their boss or company.
Yeah.
I think the best candidates take the high road and talk about how they help improve a culture rather than make it worse and be part of a problem.
I just don't think you should trash anybody, really. I think it's a fairly fair. But we have had a couple of questions that I really want to bring up, Lee, before we start summarising up. So we are coming towards the end now. So if you guys do have any more questions for Lee, pop them in. So someone said, great advice as ever, Lee. What are your thoughts on benchmarking candidates? I.e., how many people do you think you should be interviewing for a position at any given time?
So, sometimes for really niche roles, you might not have the luxury of good external candidates. So I think ideally you should always be recruiting to keep people in what I call the recruitment fridge, because you never know when you're going to need them. I think you can always benchmark people against your internal candidates, and you can also, if you're struggling with niche candidates, you can look at transferable candidates. But the more data reference points, and ultimately what you're looking for is someone that ticks as many boxes as possible. But I think the non-negotiables are cultural fit and attitude, probably cognitive ability, their ability to learn, because those aren't things that people can train. You can learn skills and experience, but you can't often change someone's poor attitude.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. And then someone's had a final comment here. Lots of employers set out project or short-term roles without actually saying so to potential recruits. So lots of recruits like short-term roles to gain experience in a particular area. So as a recruiter, you should be careful when interpreting job movements on CV. It's not always a red flag. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I think that could be fair. I've recruited exec interims that have done 10 years of doing short to long-term contracts because it suited their life, and then at a certain point they wanted to then go back into a corporate permanent career. So I think Mark makes a good point there. You know, recruitment's not black and white. You do need to, you know, it's about probing and asking good questions around those movements. And if, you know, someone's had several short-term roles because it didn't work out, I didn't like them, I didn't like what they were doing, those are the red flags to be aware of. If it's, I came to the end of an agreed short-term contract, worked really well, I did what the project was needed, I then moved on to the next contract, that's something very different.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, we kind of come to the end now. So in a second, Lee, I'm going to come to you for your top tips. So people who want to do this and want to improve their hiring process, one thing they should do to begin with. But before then, if I may kind of summarize, there's been a lot kind of out today. But essentially, I think the reasons why sometimes it goes wrong comes down to lots of reasons, but essentially it comes down to lack of training for hiring managers. And also this, which can cover things like expectations, it can cover ineffective recruitment process, ineffective questioning, but it also comes out of this kind of people hiring in desperation, them not having the time to really delve deep and figure out whether someone is or isn't a match. And the way to get around that is using a search process, SERCH. Now, if you could just tell me what those are, because I've forgotten off the top of my head. The search, what do they stand for, Lee?
Skills, experience, attitude, results, cognitive ability, and habits.
Obviously, I knew that, but I very much appreciate you helping me there. So it's using that as your process. And in that, you have a 3-stage interview process where you focus on different things in those interviews, depending on what they're doing, and really focus when you're getting references on tangible evidence, not on someone's opinion. Use those references to back up what people have said in those interview processes and make sure that those things align. And you can also kind of take LinkedIn into account on that. And when you're going through this, there are a couple of red flags that come up. And if they do come up, it's not necessarily they're dead in the water straight away, but it's just a guide for you and for your hiring managers to just delve a little bit deeper, to focus in on that and really understand why that flag is perhaps red. And it might just be a yellow flag, not a red one. So fair enough. How did I do as a summary there, Lee? It's a quick one.
Yeah, really good, Kirsty. I think, you know, everyone is trying to present the best version of themselves. And if we don't probe further to understand, you know, what they can do and what they can't do, then we find out, and then we have some surprises. Yeah. And I think our job is to find out are we willing to accept around what they can and can't do, so that there's no surprises when they start, and then we can put in a structured training and onboarding program for any gaps.
Perfect. Fantastic. Okay. So Lee, as usual, we have a top tip at the end of this. So someone's watching this and they've said, you've given us a lot of info. What's the one thing that I should do in order to kind of move forward? What's the first thing you would say they do?
So you could do everything that I've just said and still make mistakes. And the problem is that hiring is not black and white, because we're dealing with people. So every time you make a mistake, put in place a measure or process to try and reduce or ideally eliminate that mistake happening again. It's a constant evolving process.
I like that, because times change and, you know, different things come up. So that's fantastic. So we are at the end of the show. We've run over a little bit, guys. I'm sorry about that. But I want to say thank you so much to everybody who's left us a comment. It's always so helpful and so great when people do that. And I would like to say thank you to our stupendous guest today, which is the one and only Lee D'Souza.
Why, thank you, Kirsty.
You're very welcome. And we'll see you all next time.
See you next time. Thank you.